It was a warm Saturday, just a few years ago. Two friends were heading home after a really long day of hunting.
Right, and it was a dark, totally moonless night
Right.
on this abandoned logging road.
Yeah, exactly. And earlier that day, they'd actually been talking a lot about bears. I mean, they were completely terrified of them.
It's like the exact nightmare scenario they'd been dreading all day, you
It
know.
really is. So as they round this curve in the dark, they hear a low, growling sound. And about 50 meters ahead, they see it.
Just this large, kind of dimly illuminated animal just quivering slowly right in the middle of the road.
Yeah, so they're terrified, right? They raise their rifles and they fire, and the growling and the quivering, it just stops instantly.
But it wasn't a bear that went down.
No. A second later, they heard an unmistakably human scream.
Oh, man.
Yeah. They rushed over, and their relief just turned into absolute horror because they hadn't shot a bear at all.
Right.
They had shot a bright yellow rectangular camping tent, and tragically, one of the campers inside was killed.
It's just an incredibly devastating story. And, when the shooter went to trial for negligent homicide, the prosecution basically laughed at his defense.
I mean, you can kind of see why from the outside.
Exactly. They actually brought this bright yellow rectangular tent right into the middle of the courtroom. And they asked the jury a question that seemed to have, well, a really obvious answer.
Right, like how on earth could a human brain mistake a bright yellow tent for a furry brown bear?
Right. And on the surface, it just sounds like a desperate, fabricated lie to stay out of prison.
But today, we are taking a deep dive into the hidden mechanics of human perception to answer that exact question.
Yeah, we're really unpacking the source material in this.
Exactly. We're looking at an extensive dive into the psychology of perception to figure out how a human brain transforms a piece of yellow canvas into a living, breathing monster.
Because the sources reveal a deeply unsettling truth about how we experience the world.
They really do. Like what you see, what you hear, what you feel, it isn't a direct video feed of reality. It's not objective truth at all.
No, it's more like a highly edited, heavily constructed model of the world that your brain basically builds from scratch every single millisecond.
And to construct that model, the brain relies on this sort of invisible assembly line.
Right, and our sources break this down into 5 major functions, which are attention, localization, recognition, abstraction, and constancy.
And I gotta say, by the time we finish exploring this assembly line, you are fundamentally going to change how you trust your own eyes, ears, and memories.
Definitely. Because before your brain can even begin to build this model of reality, it has to decide what raw data to actually let in the front door.
Yeah, because we are just endlessly bombarded with sensory information,
Oh,
right?
the sheer volume of data hitting your nervous system at any given second is staggering. I mean, if you just stop right now and notice, say, the feeling of your left shoe pressing against your foot.
Oh, yeah, I feel it now that you mention it.
Right. Or, the faint hum of a refrigerator or the temperature of the air on your arms. That data was always there, hitting your receptors. You just weren't perceiving it until you shifted your attention to it.
So the brain basically has to ruthlessly filter this avalanche of data just to function at all.
Exactly.
And I was really fascinated by how this filtering process works with our vision because, we tend to think our eyes work like a smartphone camera, right?
Just smoothly panning across a scene, recording a continuous video.
Yeah, but the sources point out that we use something called visual scanning. Our eyes actually make these tiny stationary stops to acquire data. They're called fixations.
And those last about, 300 milliseconds?
Yeah, about that. But here's the thing. If we're constantly stopping to take these little snapshots, why doesn't the world look like a choppy slideshow?
Well, it's because of what happens between those snapshots. Between the fixations, your eyes make these incredibly rapid, jerky jumps called saccades.
Saccades, right?
Yeah, and these saccades take about 20 milliseconds. And during that jump, your vision is essentially completely suppressed. You are temporarily blind.
Wait, really? We're just blind for those 20 milliseconds?
Literally blind.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain simply shuts off the feed, takes the stationary snapshots, and then stitches them together to give you this seamless illusion of a smooth, continuous reality.
Wow. It's like your brain is a ruthless bouncer at an exclusive nightclub, It turns away a massive percentage of reality at the door, so the VIP section, like your conscious awareness, doesn't get totally overwhelmed.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah.
And this bouncer has very specific rules about what information gets priority to.
Right, like something the sources call weapon focus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If someone is mugged at gunpoint, the brain's bouncer prioritizes the most unusual, threatening piece of information in the environment, which is the gun.
So it lets every detail of that weapon into the VIP section, but it might just completely ignore the perpetrator's face.
Exactly. And we see the exact same filtering with our hearing, too. Think about the cocktail party effect.
Oh, yeah, where you're in a crowded, noisy room with dozens of people talking, but you can use purely mental focus to tune into one single conversation.
Right. But the cost of that focus is really steep. Researchers test this using a technique called shadowing.
How does that work?
So they play a completely different audio track into each ear of a participant, and they ask them to repeat aloud what they hear in, say, the right ear.
Okay, so they're hyper-focused on the right ear.
Exactly. And afterward, when they're asked about the audio played into the left ear, participants remember absolutely nothing. I mean, they don't even notice if the language in the left ear suddenly changes from English to French.
Because it never really got past the bouncer.
Exactly. It was just filtered out. And that filtering leads to a wild phenomenon known as inattentional blindness.
Oh, I think I've seen the video for this one.
Probably. There's a famous experiment where researchers asked participants to watch a video of students passing a basketball. And the instruction was to count the exact number of passes. Well, while the viewers are intensely focused on counting, a person in a full gorilla suit walks slowly right through the middle of the game. They literally thump their chest and walk off.
And people miss it.
Because the participants' attention is completely saturated by the basketball,
Yeah.
almost half of them never even see the gorilla.
That is just wild to me. You can literally have a primate on your retinas, but if you aren't paying attention, it never actually exists in your mind.
Yeah. And it gets even stranger with something called change blindness.
Oh, this is the door study, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
Researchers at Cornell conducted a study where an actor stopped a pedestrian on campus to ask for directions.
Okay.
So while the pedestrian is looking down at a map, two people carrying a large, opaque door walk right between the actor and the pedestrian.
So totally blocking their view for a second.
Exactly. And during that brief blocked view, the actor swaps places with one of the people carrying the door.
Wait, so the pedestrian looks back up and is now giving directions to a completely different human being.
A completely different person, different clothes, different voice, totally different build. And less than half of the pedestrians even noticed the swap had occurred.
That raises a huge question for me, though. I mean, if we are literally blind to so much of our environment, gorillas walking through a room, people swapping faces mid-conversation, isn't that a massive evolutionary disadvantage?
It seems like it would be, right?
Yeah. How did we survive with such a faulty system?
Well, it feels like a flaw, but it's actually a critical survival mechanism. I mean, if your brain attempted to consciously process every single leaf on a tree, every rustle in the forest, and every pressure point on your skin all at the exact same time, the sheer computational load would completely paralyze you.
Oh, so you'd just be overloaded.
Exactly. You wouldn't be able to make a single decision or take any action.
Yeah.
So the bottleneck of attention isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's designed to keep you focused on what actually matters most for survival.
You know, since attention acts as a strict bottleneck, it turns out we can actually exploit this design to achieve something incredible.
Yeah, the medical applications are amazing.
Because researchers are using this exact limitation to basically shut off severe physical pain. The sources detail the story of Lieutenant Sam Brown, who was severely burned in an explosion in Afghanistan.
Right. He had third-degree burns covering 30% of his body.
Yeah, and the daily wound care procedures were just excruciating, and standard opioid painkillers just weren't enough to manage the agony for him.
And this is where cognitive psychologists stepped in. They introduced a virtual reality game called Snow World.
Snow World.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Lieutenant Brown had his wounds cleaned, they placed a VR helmet on him. And he wasn't just passively watching a screen. He was actively flying through an icy canyon.
Throwing virtual snowballs at penguins and snowmen, right.
Well,
all while listening to Paul Simon music, if I remember the source correctly.
That's right. And the results were stunning. They used fMRI scans, which basically measure blood flow in the brain as a proxy for neural activity. And those scans showed a 50 to 97% drop in pain-related brain activity while he was in that VR environment.
Okay, wait, let me challenge the underlying logic of that for a second.
Sure.
Because pain isn't just an idea, right? It's a physical nerve signal. A burn sends a biological impulse up the spinal cord to the brain. How can throwing snowballs at a virtual penguin physically stop a biological nerve signal from firing?
Well, that's the thing. It doesn't stop the nerve from firing. It stops the brain from perceiving the signal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this is explained by the gate control theory of pain. Basically, for a pain signal from your skin to actually be felt by you as agony, it requires conscious attention.
Okay, I'm following.
Now, consider that the visual cortex makes up a massive 20% of the human brain. By flooding that huge visual processing center with this highly interactive ICVR world, the brain literally exhausts its attentional bandwidth.
Wow.
It just doesn't have the remaining cognitive resources to process the incoming pain signals from the burns. So it proves that pain is not just a physical reflex,
Yeah.
Perception is a psychological interpretation.
So if the bouncer is fully occupied dealing with virtual penguins, the pain simply isn't allowed into the club.
Exactly.
But okay, for the visual data that actually does get in, how does the brain know what to do with a chaotic jumble of light? Because the reality hitting the back of your eye, the retina, is just a flat, two-dimensional projection.
Right, it's just a 2D image.
So how does the brain build a full three-dimensional world out of a flat surface?
Well, it builds that 3D stage through a process called localization. At first, it has to organize the chaos using Gestalt principles.
Gestalt?
Yeah, Gestalt essentially means that the whole is perceived as greater than the sum of its parts. So if you see a scattering of dots, your brain instantly clusters them by proximity.
Like grouping dots that are close together.
Exactly. Or by something called good continuation, which means following a smooth line rather than seeing jagged separate pieces. It just instantly organizes raw pixels into coherent figures and backgrounds.
And then it has to calculate depth, which, I mean, that seems impossible from a flat retina.
It does, but it uses a clever biological trick. Because our eyes are spaced a few inches apart, each eye receives a slightly different 2D image.
Right.
You can actually test this right now. If you hold your finger close to your nose and close one eye, then open it and close the other, your figure seems to jump back and forth.
Oh, yeah, it totally jumps.
The difference between the two images is called binocular disparity. The brain is constantly calculating that mathematical difference to prove exactly how close an object is to your face.
But that only works for things right in front of us, right? Like, I can't use binocular disparity to figure out how far away a mountain is.
Correct. For distant objects, the brain acts more like a detective relying on monocular cues. So, clues that only require one eye.
Oh, like what?
It looks at shading, or interposition, which is really just noticing if one object overlaps and blocks another. And it also relies heavily on motion parallax.
Oh, motion parallax.
Yeah.
That makes total sense when you picture, like, sitting on a fast-moving train.
Yeah, perfect example.
Because you look out the window and the trees right next to the tracks are just blurring by in the opposite direction at incredible speed. But the mountains, way off in the distance, seem to be moving along with you, barely drifting at all.
Exactly. The brain measures those different relative speeds and basically concludes, well, the slow thing must be very far away.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the brain relies so heavily on these specific depth cues to build its 3D stage that if you manipulate the cues, you can completely break the brain's sense of reality.
Like an optical illusion.
Exactly. A classic example in the sources is the Ames room illusion.
Oh, I've seen pictures of this.
Yeah. If you look into an Ames room through a specific peephole, your retina receives an image of a perfectly normal rectangular room with a checkered floor. But if you place two identical adults in opposite corners, one looks like a towering giant and the other looks like a miniature person.
Wait, is this forced perspective? Like how Peter Jackson filmed The Lord of the Rings to make normal-sized actors look like tiny hobbits next to wizards?
It is the exact same mechanism. The Ames room is actually shaped like a severely distorted trapezoid. The floor slopes dramatically, the ceiling slants, and the corner where the tiny person is standing is actually twice as far away from the people.
Oh, so because they're further away, they project a physically smaller image onto your retina.
Exactly. But here is where the brain fails. Because your brain expects the room to be a normal rectangle, based on its previous experience with rooms throughout your life.
Right.
It refuses to believe the person is farther away. So it calculates the only remaining logical conclusion. It thinks if they're standing in the same normal room but taking up less visual space, they must be physically tiny.
So the brain literally forces the raw data to fit its assumptions.
Yes.
It reminds me of a real-time video stabilization engine. It's just constantly rendering and stabilizing bizarre, distorted images so the world feels consistent to us.
That's a great way to put it, and that stabilization is called constancy. Take shape constancy, for example. When a rectangular door swings open towards you, The actual shape of the light hitting your retina turns into a narrow trapezoid, and then eventually just a thin vertical line.
Uh,
But your brain's stabilization engine intervenes, so you perceive a solid rectangular door the entire time.
oh, I never even thought about that. And according to the sources, this constant stabilization is what creates the famous moon illusion, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because we've all seen it, the moon looks absolutely massive, sometimes almost ominous when it's low on the horizon.
Right.
But then hours later, when it's high up in the empty night sky, it looks totally normal, like a small coin. Yet, the physical image hitting the retina is the exact same size in both locations.
It's completely identical. The moon illusion is a direct result of the size, distance, and variance principle.
That's a mouthful. How does that work?
So when the moon is sitting on the horizon, it's visually sitting behind trees, hills, and buildings. Your brain's monocular depth cues tell it, oh, that object is incredibly far away. But when the moon is high in the empty sky, there are no trees or buildings to provide those depth cues. The brain loses its sense of distance.
Ah,
Because the
that.
brain assumes the horizon moon is much further away, but the retinal image remains the exact same size. The stabilization engine kicks in. It concludes, if it's that much further away and still projecting this much light, it must be physically enormous.
Wow, so it literally inflates the moon in your conscious awareness.
It does.
Okay, so we've established how the brain builds the 3D stage and figures out where things are, but how do we know what they are? Like, how does a chaotic jumble of lines become recognizable as a coffee cup or a car?
Right. This is the problem of recognition. And cognitive psychologist Irving Biederman proposed a really fascinating theory called recognition by components.
And what's the core idea there?
Biederman suggested that every single object in the visual world can be broken down into a fundamental alphabet of just 36 basic three-dimensional geometric shapes.
Just 36.
Just 36. He called these shapes juns. They're simple forms like cylinders, blocks, cones, and wedges.
So they're essentially visual Legos.
Exactly like Legos.
But how does the brain extract a 3D block from a flat image on the retina?
It does this by aggressively scanning for line intersections, edges, and shadows.
Mm.
If the brain detects, say, two parallel lines connected by an ellipse, it instantly identifies the cylinder gene.
Okay.
And then, if you combine a cylinder with a curved handle-shaped gene on the side, your brain checks its memory database and recognizes a coffee cup.
Oh, and if you combine a cylinder with a curved gene over the top, it recognizes a bucket.
Exactly. By combining just a handful of these 36 genes, you can create tens of thousands of complex objects. This is called bottom-up processing, basically building a perception purely from the raw incoming sensory data.
But raw data isn't always enough, right? Especially if it's dark or noisy.
No, it's definitely not.
The sources highlight that we also heavily rely on top-down processing, which is where our expectations, our past memories, and our context step in to heavily edit the final perception.
And this top-down editing can create some bizarre glitches in our reality.
Yeah, totally.
A perfect demonstration of top-down processing overriding raw data is the McGurk effect. Have you heard of this?
I think so, but break it down for us.
So in this experiment, you watch a video of a person's lips clearly mouthing the sound gaga.
Okay.
However, the audio track playing over the video is the sound baba.
So the visual and the audio don't match?
Exactly. The brain's bottled-up data is in total conflict. Visually, it knows you cannot make a ba sound without closing your lips. So it takes the conflicting visual and auditory streams, applies its expectations of how human speech works, and literally synthesizes an entirely new sound.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you will swear you're hearing the person say da-da.
Wait, if top-down processing can literally force us to hear sounds that do not exist in the physical world, isn't our brain basically hallucinating our reality based on what it expects to happen?
In many ways, yes. Context heavily dictates perception. For example, if the raw visual data of a rectangular block is projected onto your retina while you are standing in a kitchen, your top-down processing expects food.
So it instantly recognizes the shape as a loaf of bread.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you see the exact same raw shape on a street corner,
Yeah.
your brain expects mail, so it recognizes a mailbox.
Wow.
This top-down guesswork is essential, really, because it allows us to navigate the world at lightning speed without having to endlessly analyze every single object from scratch.
But when our context and our expectations are wrong, the consequences can be disastrous.
They really can be.
The sources bring up the tragic case of Amadou Diallo in 1996. Diallo was standing in his doorway when police approached him, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet.
Right.
But the officers who were operating in a high-stress context with the intense expectation of danger perceived the drawn wallet as a gun.
Yeah, the sources use this to show a devastating real-world example of how top-down processing, driven by expectations and context, can just completely override the objective, bottom-up visual data of what an object actually is.
It highlights a profound vulnerability in human cognition, really. We don't see the world exactly as it is, we see it as we expect it to be.
And to process all this data at that lightning speed, the brain takes one final massive shortcut. It uses abstraction.
Right. It reminds me of how a computer saves files, actually. Like, we don't save raw, high-resolution video files of our lives. We save heavily compressed JPEGs and maybe a few bullet points of text.
That's a highly accurate comparison.
Sure.
A physical description of any object is wildly complex. Think about trying to mentally render every single pore, eyelash, and shadow on a person's face.
It would be impossible.
Right. If your brain tried to store a literal pixel-by-pixel photographic memory of everything you see, you would run out of neural storage almost instantly. To demonstrate this, consider a digital drawing on a computer.
Okay.
A highly detailed, bit-mapped image of a face might require 30,000 bytes of memory. But if you compress that face into a simplified, abstract cartoon using just a few standard ovals and lines, it only takes up 900 bytes.
That is a massive 97% savings in memory.
Huge savings.
So the brain throws away the intricate details and just keeps the concept.
Exactly. And a classic experiment by Carmichael proves that we often store the abstract text summary rather than the visual image.
Oh, the ambiguous shape study.
Yes. Researchers showed participants an ambiguous line drawing, just two circles connected by a short straight line. Half the participants were told, this is a drawing of curtains in a window.
Okay.
The other half were told, this is a diamond in a rectangle.
So they just changed the verbal label of the exact same image.
Right. And later, when they asked the participants to draw what they had seen purely from memory, their drawings warped to match the label.
Wow.
The group who heard curtains drew something with swooping lines that looked much more like literal curtains. The diamond group drew sharp, angular diamonds.
So they didn't remember the raw visual data at all. They just remembered the abstracted text label they had assigned to it.
Exactly.
Oh.
Because from an evolutionary standpoint, we don't need infinite detail to survive. We just need enough abstract detail to navigate around a rock, grasp a tool, or recognize a friend's mood. The brain simply discards the rest of the physical data.
So let's bring this all the way back to our two hunters, Alex and Simon, on that dark logging road at the beginning of the deep dive.
Right.
It was night. The visual input, the raw bottom-up data was incredibly sparse. It was just a dimly lit, ambiguous, quivering shape.
And because that bottom-up data was so poor, their brains had almost no choice but to rely entirely on top-down processing.
Yeah, because they had been talking about bears for hours. They were terrified of bears.
So their internal context was completely saturated with the expectation of a predator.
So their brains took that ambiguous, shadowed yellow shape, threw away the inconsistencies, and abstracted it into a bear.
Yeah.
When they swore in court that they saw a bear, it wasn't a desperate lie. Their brains literally constructed the three-dimensional model of a bear, stabilized it, and fed it to their conscious awareness as objective truth.
It was a deadly miscalculation by an otherwise brilliant perceptual machine. And it perfectly illustrates the profound danger of trusting our senses implicitly without questioning the context.
The ultimate takeaway here is that your reality is a carefully curated, heavily edited model, and it's designed to keep you alive and moving quickly. It is not designed to show you strict objective truth.
No, it's not.
So the next time you are absolutely 100% certain of what you saw or what you heard, pause for a second. Remember the gorilla walking through the basketball game. Remember the moon inflating on the horizon. And remember the yellow tent.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If our perception of the world is just a highly compressed, abstracted model built out of a mere 36 geometric blocks and heavily distorted by our own personal expectations,
Yeah.
how much of the actual objective reality sitting right in front of you are you entirely blind to at this very moment?